Hello, everyone. Welcome back.
So just to be clear, I should start in, say, 30 seconds.
All right, we got a lag. Okay, everybody, welcome back from the break. And we'll just start off right away with Nick Lent. He's a wastewater engineer from the Wisconsin DNR, and he'll be presenting the Fox River and Total Phosphorus, a status update from the Wisconsin DNR. Take it away, Nick.
Excellent. All right. Just want to make sure that this is working. It looks like I'm not muted. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nick Lent. As Ben mentioned, I'm a wastewater engineer in the wastewater permit program for the Wisconsin DNR. And I'm excited to talk to you today about a few things. In the course of 20 minutes, I'd like to discuss water quality conditions in the Fox River, and I will include my personalized assessment of where we have been, where we are now, and where we would like to go. I will also be speaking primarily from the wastewater permit perspective, where, because I've worked in the wastewater program for about 7 years now, I have really kind of just settled into that perspective, but I do my best to try to provide a whole scale understanding in this presentation. So before we do get going, I just wanted to mention that I will likely revert to using a few acronyms or terms which might not be familiar to everyone. A couple of common ones are listed here in this table that I will be going over and referencing back and forth later today. So we've got the concept of a total maximum daily load, a point source. Oh, sorry about that. I thought I could turn off my computer and get things a little bit more organized, but messed up, and we'll need to get my slide back here. Sorry about that. Of course, I'm gonna see if I can stop sharing and all right, sorry about that. I've been on mute, or I've been on audio the whole time. I think I'm ready to start again. I'll give it another shot. My apologies for that. So if I can give this another shot. Share screen. All right, becoming an expert here. Thanks everyone for bearing with me. Sorry about that. Go to the slideshow from the beginning. All right, let's keep this moving. Sorry about that. So acronyms, I covered that there will be several things mentioned today, which may not be familiar to everyone. So the concept of a total maximum daily load, or a Tmdl, is something that will be the bread and butter of this discussion later today. So something that goes into that are point sources, non-point sources, wastewater treatment facilities, the DNR, perhaps one that's a little bit harder to to guess would be a municipal separate storm sewer system that's referred to as an MS4 later in this presentation, wastewater, and a water quality based effluent limit, commonly known as a QBEL in my lingo. So with that, just want to break into the core concept.
Sorry, we're not seeing your screen at the moment.
Okay. Thank you for the reminder. Let me just. Oh, all right. I thought I was out of the woods there. Let me go back to Zoom. There. I apologize. We're gonna get going. Can I get a confirmation now that?
Yep, looks good.
Okay. My apologies. Let's keep this. Just want to get it kicked over to where I can see that now it's There we go. All right. Third time is a charm. Nothing like that to throw you off a little bit. So just want to talk about an overview of the issue. There are impaired waters, excess nutrients, nuisance conditions, eutrophication, oxygen depletion. These sort of things can come from excess phosphorus being discharged or running off and entering surface waters in Wisconsin. So to give a visualization of the issue here in southeast Wisconsin, I found this picture of the Fox River near Waterford, Wisconsin. This picture includes the Fox River main stem, as well as portions of Buena Lake and Vista Lake, or Buena Lake and Lake Michigan, I mean. So there have been quite a few strides made in the way of phosphorus regulation in the last 50 years or so. Some of the main concepts, or I guess milestones, specifically from a point source perspective, are mentioned here on this slide, where we see that interest started to grow in the 1960s and 70s for ways to manage and control phosphorus pollution in order to reduce or eliminate nuisance conditions. So with the Clean Water Act passage in 1972, there was a requirement for secondary treatment within a certain amount of time for most wastewater treatment facilities, which really did lead to an improvement in the effluent water quality that was being discharged. But there wasn't anything specifically in the way of phosphorus regulation. That came a little bit later, but in the meantime, there were some targets and agreements made in specific areas depending on different needs of different watersheds. There were some investigations and agreements that were made where ultimately phosphorus reduction and treatment at wastewater treatment plants specifically became a focus for water quality improvement at that time. And I think that's really exemplified in the next slide that I'll show, which gives an idea of where phosphorus water quality conditions have come and gone in the last 50 years. Before I do that, I just would like to mention that then again, most recently in 2010, the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources did promulgate water quality criteria for almost all surface waters in Wisconsin. And that prompted there to be a need for an evaluation of water quality-based effluent limits for phosphorus. And this has led Wisconsin to calculate and include some fairly low phosphorus, some really low phosphorus limits for point source discharges. So it's been a journey in the last few years, but I'm here to just talk about the general concept in the next 15 or 20 minutes. So with that, you can see that this is the Fox River near Waukesha. I thought that this proved or shows that there has been a very good reduction in phosphorus water quality over the last 40 or 50 years. You can see that things were really coming down quite a bit between the late 70s and early 80s. And I think that a lot of that comes from the development of secondary treatment and in some cases, standard phosphorus removal technology being implemented at wastewater treatment plants, such as chemical addition like your ferric chloride or aluminum sulfate. Those things are going to help reduce a lot of phosphorus that would have otherwise been passing through the treated wastewater and going into the surface waters. So with that, we can see here, looking at the graph, that that lowest value is 0.1 milligrams per liter. The water quality criteria for the Fox River at this location is a little bit below that. It's 0.075. It's a really common criteria that applies to most of the stream miles in Wisconsin. There are some larger water bodies, such as the Fox River further downstream, which have a criteria of 0.1 milligrams per liter, which is those water bodies are specifically listed in code, but other than that, for a unidirectional flowing body of water, the criteria is 75 parts per billion, or 0.075 milligrams per liter. So you can see that we aren't quite there. And with that, a common tool that will be used is a total maximum daily load. So a total maximum daily load it's a model that's put together that evaluates how much pollutant a water body can receive while still meeting a water quality standard. A waterway that exceeds its water quality standard is no longer suitable for its designated uses. And with that, it gets impaired, or it gets listed on the 303D list, which is a requirement for the state of Wisconsin to put together every 2 years to evaluate which waters in Wisconsin are meeting surface water quality criteria and their use impairments. So with that, the Fox River is up for development of a Tmdl. The state of Wisconsin as a whole has been putting together and working diligently on many different Tmdls, and I'd say over half of the land area in the state of Wisconsin is now covered by a finalized Tmdl. And that's really a good thing, because these models they're very useful when there's multiple sources of pollution. So far, like I said, I've mentioned mostly wastewater permits and wastewater point sources, but there can be pollutants coming from many different sources, and total maximum daily load is a really good tool to use for trying to come up with fair and equitable reductions from all of those sources in order to get the water body to where it needs to be. So here we will enter the basic portion of today's presentation. I'd like to cover an outline for the Fox and Des Plaines River Basin Tmdl that the Wisconsin DNR has just started working in earnest on. Starting last year, actually, we tried to get started in March of 2020, and we got out and got some equipment set up. And then with COVID-19 setting in, there were a couple of months where we held back and didn't mobilize as much as we would like to, but we did eventually get things going again. And I'm happy to report that the Tmdl data collection phase, which we'll talk about in a moment, did start last year. So with that, there's several things that we'll be talking about here today, so you can see that we'll follow this approach. So first up, we have a project team. The project coordinators that will be involved throughout this process are Eric Hetler and Kevin Kirsch. These are a couple of folks who work out of central office in Madison, and they will help us kind of lead the way and help us deal with some interesting questions and tough problems to solve as we work through this. Sector leads are an important part of the process and approach. So the stormwater program will have Jake Zimmerman. The wastewater program, I'll be included in that. We'll get somebody to cover the agricultural side of things, and monitoring is currently, that project is being led by Rachel Saber, who is our streams biologist for the area. So to talk about the project selection, the DNR felt it was important to develop this Tmdl because, as I've mentioned, we've been working on them for a while now. And the Fox River represents a fairly small amount of the land area in Wisconsin, but it is about 600,000 acres. And there are multiple sources of pollution, as I mentioned earlier. There's a fairly diverse range of areas where the phosphorus comes from. And with that, there also is a fairly dense inclusion of point sources, which I had mentioned earlier. Wastewater permits are facing some really restrictive effluent limits that were developed in the absence of a more comprehensive model, such as a Tmdl. So with that, we are glad to get going on the Fox River TMDL and potentially provide a more comprehensive evaluation of what sort of water quality improvements are needed. So with that, looking at the project area, you can see that the majority of Waukesha, Walworth, Kenosha, and Racine County do drain to the Fox River. Some of the watersheds or areas closer to the Illinois-Wisconsin border end up draining into the Fox River through a different local subwatershed. But with that, you can see, as I mentioned earlier, there's about 600,000 acres. I forgot the total number of miles. Obviously, it's listed there. So another thing that we would look at would be the land use. This is important to just take into consideration, because if land use isn't uniform throughout the basin, we really want to make sure that we're being aware of that and using appropriate methods to evaluate what should be done in certain locations in order to come up with something that's meaningful. So there is a pretty diverse land use in the Fox, Illinois River Basin. Wetland, open water, forest, grassland makes up a good mix. We do have a fair amount of forest left with the Kettle Moraine Southern Unit in Waukesha and Walworth County that is included there. There's a fair amount of grassland, and primarily the largest land used is agriculture, even though we are looking at one of the more densely populated and urban settings in the state. There is still a fair amount of agriculture, and as well as urban land. So a lot of that falls in Waukesha County, closer, suburbs to the Milwaukee area, but there is some urban land as well in Walworth, Racine, and Kenosha County, which that plays into things as far as delivery of pollutants and how things are coming. So a term that I had mentioned earlier would be a municipal separate storm sewer permit. These certain municipal entities that are over 5,000 people or have a developed land area over a certain amount require coverage with an MS4 permit. And it's important to note that some of the existing conditions that the MS4 permit holders have faced currently might become more restrictive once a TMDL is developed and we have a better idea of what is actually needed to protect water quality. So it does create some uniquely shaped jurisdictions, as you can see with the map here, but we have been working through this, and we look forward to reaching out to these communities and communicating just what might be needed and just going down the road. So with that, something closer to my line of work would be an evaluation of the point sources. These are individual wastewater permits in the basin. There are a total of 26 individual permits that are active right now. This map actually shows more than 26 little triangles, which are supposed to depict outfall locations. It's just a few years old, and there's actually been some regionalization, or certain industries are no longer in action, and so we're looking at 26 current point sources. Most of them are municipal wastewater treatment facilities. All of them have had effluent limits that assigned to them that are less than, or that are based on the newest criteria that Wisconsin has developed. So most of these facilities are facing pretty restrictive limits, and so development of a TMDL will play into that. There are other general permits too, things like non-contact cooling water, where a facility might be using city water, which has orthophosphate or an orthopolyphosphate blend added to it, and is used for a cooling purpose and discharged to a local water body. Those will ultimately get wrapped into this as well. we've got some experience with that with the Milwaukee River Tmdl. So as we look at the impairments, you can see that the Fox River, from its headwaters all the way to the state line, is listed as impaired for not meeting the it's listed as impaired for excessive total phosphorus, as well as total suspended solids or sedimentation that's occurring. So there are quite a few river miles of impaired water. There are some other tributaries that feed into the Fox River are also listed as impaired, such as the White River. And there are a few lakes. There aren't any lakes or impoundments in line on the Fox River, but there are some in the area, such as Eagle Lake and Wind Lake, which are listed as impaired, which will ultimately be included in the modeling that's put together. So I had intended to include some information about the 303D process, but looks like I missed that. I have described that the Clean Water Act requires states to assess which waters are meeting their designated uses or not. If they're not meeting their designated uses, they're listed as impaired. And that's a general summary of the 303D process. So to look at the monitoring that has been taking place since last year, the Wisconsin DNR has worked to set up a couple of its own sites, but we are working in coordination with Cadmus, who's a consultant that has been hired to help expand our resources and get information from across the basin. So we certainly have had a lot of data collected over the last 50 years or so that is already available. But one common, I guess, a problem that we noticed was that there was a much smaller data set as far as flow information. So we wanted to get flow information from a select number of locations, as well as this concentration data, because when you have your concentration information as far as just how much phosphorus is in the water per unit volume, and when you have the flow of how much flow is going through the water body for a certain period of time, you can get an idea of how much mass is actually going through the system. And that's what the Tmdl will be based upon. It's an assessment of how much mass the water body can take while meeting a concentration. So with that, there's a table here that provides a pretty wild summary of the data that was collected last year. You can see that there's some seasonal variation. I understand this graph is fairly hard to interpret in a short period of time, but I spent quite a bit looking at it. But it goes from month to month, and these different colored lines are the different locations that were on that map that I had just shown. And you can see that depending on what month or week the data was collected, the data can really bounce all around a lot. And I think that's a point to be made as far as the fact that non-point source loading or loading from agricultural, stormwater, different sources like that play into how much phosphorus we're seeing in these waters quite a bit. So the wastewater program at DNR we've been after the point sources, and we've really gotten after them, and we've got a lot of the low and medium hanging fruit there. But the Tmdl is really going to be important to manage these non-point sources. So to just look at a different style presentation of total phosphorus data, you can see that there is, like I had pointed out earlier, there's been a great reduction in the last 50 years, but based upon this line that's listed here, the 0.075 milligram per liter criteria for example, the Fox River at Waukesha, the river is still well above that, and so the Tmdl will be a process that we use to help bring this thing home. We will definitely take into consideration how close the river has been to the criteria, which will maybe play into how some of the other effluent limits will play out. So with that, there has been a reduction in concentration, but there has been an increase in flow that we've realized. There's been a lot of rain in the last couple of decades, I'd say a couple of years. And with that, that means that the reduction in loading hasn't been quite as distinct. So it's important to look at both the flow and concentration for these parameters. The Fox River further downstream, this location is actually right in between. It's on the border between Kenosha and Racine County, so only about 20 miles from the Wisconsin and Illinois border. And it actually shows that the Fox River is below the criteria at that location. Maybe not consistently below criteria, maybe not with a great confidence interval, but certainly we see that. So again, there's been an even clearer increase though in the flow. So with that, we are seeing a less distinct decrease in the mass. So this next slide, I gotta catch up on time here. So to just discuss the modeling approach, there will be several different, like I had mentioned, based upon the land use and the way that pollutants are entering the watershed, we'll need to look at different conditions, and we'll use a variety of different models to develop ultimately the Tmdl. So to cover a bit of the timeline and the schedule, the monitoring had started last year and it will continue through 2022. One thing that isn't included on this slide is the outreach. The outreach is really going to be an important part of this process, and we look forward to reaching out to the stakeholders starting later this year. We were going to do that last year, but with COVID and other things happening, it just didn't happen. Getting back to the slide, the modeling is expected to start later this year and will continue into 2022. And with that, we'll provide draft materials and put together a Tmdl report in sometime next year or the year after. This will be submitted to EPA for final approval in 2023 or 2024. So there will be things happening in the next few years, and outreach will start soon. Implementation it's really the most important part of the Tmdl. I can talk about development and putting together a report all day long, but it's not going to improve water quality. So with that, the way that we intend to make that happen is by putting the recommendations of the Tmdl into wastewater permits, as well as permits for non-point source loads. And with that, so that will take 5-10 years for implementation to really start. And so to get back to the outreach process, this material was more so for me. So just to cover this before I lose too much more time, just want to mention that from a special consideration standpoint, there are some special considerations that the DNR is aware of. The need for consideration of flow changes with the Waukesha diversion, and as well as the chain of lakes south of the border. We know that there is a lake criteria that's more restrictive than most of the criteria that are effective in Wisconsin, and some requirements might be tougher to meet than they're currently specified. So with that, the DNR Tmdl webpage will be updated very soon. Outreach will start later this year. Methods will be discussed in more detail, and we look forward to hearing from our stakeholders. With that, I think I burned up most of my time and I'm unable to go into I really wanted to spend a moment to talk about some of the current compliance approaches for point sources across Wisconsin. I think there are some good success stories there. Just give a shout out to all the entities that I work with as far as doing what they can to protect water quality. I think everyone's really been doing a pretty nice job of that, if I can say it very briefly. So with that, I don't think I left much of an opportunity for questions unless I'm mistaken. And I thank everyone for your time listening to this presentation today. You can reach out to me. I will share my contact information in some way as soon as possible. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Nick. We will definitely, we'll get your contact information on our website as well. So we'll move from phosphorus to chloride here with Justin Winsett, who's a senior specialist biologist with the Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission, with his presentation, Salt in the Environment, Water Quality Update for the Fox River Basin. Justin.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Hope y'all can hear me okay. Yeah, thanks for attending my talk. So today I'll be discussing our ongoing regional chloride study with a specific focus on what we're doing in the Fox River Watershed. Then hopefully I'll have a chance to talk about some work that others have been doing, other organizations, both in Illinois and Wisconsin, and how we can kind of bridge the state lines and look at some data trends and some water quality trends for chloride across the entire watershed from up here in Menominee Falls, where I am, all the way down to Ottawa. So first off, let's talk about why we're talking about chloride in general. So chloride is naturally occurring. It's known as halite or rock salt. You can see a picture of it in the top right there. It's a component of table salt, sodium chloride. It's an essential electrolyte that we need to survive. It helps provide water and pH balance in our bodies. It's water soluble, and that makes it highly mobile in the environment. So anywhere water goes, streams, rivers, groundwater, chloride goes with it. It's also pretty non-reactive, and that makes it really difficult to remove from the environment. There's no natural processes to remove chloride from a lake or river aside from flowing out of that water body. And it takes some work at the wastewater treatment plant to remove chloride. And that it's also really problematic at high concentrations and can become toxic to organisms at really high concentrations. So there's a variety of sources of chloride in our environment, both natural and anthropogenic. Some of the natural sources include weathering of minerals and soils, and you also have atmospheric deposition of chloride. A lot more of the sources that we see and what can cause problems are human or anthropogenic sources. So that could include road salt application and storage, water softening, wastewater treatment plants, chemical manufacturing and food processing, potassium chloride fertilizer, also known as potash, animal waste from feedlots, and then leachate from landfills. And again, when you have these really high concentrations of chloride, it can be toxic to both terrestrial and aquatic organisms. So it really can cause problems for our surface waters. There are a couple different toxicity criterions for chloride for both chronic and acute toxicity. And you can see a table here with the Wisconsin and US EPA chronic and acute criteria. Chronic being defined as sublethal adverse effects with indefinite exposure, and acute as adverse effects with less than 24 hours exposure. So that could be a single dose or multiple doses causing the death of the target of the test organism. In addition to these toxicity standards, we also have a drinking water secondary standard for chloride from the US EPA, and that's 250 milligrams per liter. And that's basically when you actually can taste the salt in the water. So using that standard, using the standard of the 230 milligrams per liter, which is the chronic US EPA toxicity limit, only takes 1 teaspoon of salt to pollute 5 gallons of water. So really not much at all. And just to put these numbers into context, the pre-European settlement concentrations of chloride were thought to be around 5 milligrams per liter or less in our surface waters. And so we are seeing surface waters in Wisconsin, reaching impairment for chloride. So we're way above those 5 milligrams per liter or less. One of the major sources that we're looking at, one of the major sources recognized nationally for increasing chloride concentrations is road salting and winter de-icing. So the figure here shows the annual road salt application in metric tons across the entire US. And so you can see it really starts picking up, the amount applied really starts picking up in the 1960s when you had the expansion of the federal highway system. And you also had much greater use of personal automobiles at that time. Over time, you have drivers who become accustomed to having, clear, drier roads in winter, even after a huge storm dumps tons of snow. So that our standards have changed somewhat for what we're expecting on our roads. And so people apply more salt. You also can have oversalting and over de-icing in parking lots. Some of that might be to avoid liability issues and slip and falls and that kind of thing. And you can see an example of some of that oversalting in the bottom right image here. So what we're doing, the Southeastern Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission, is looking at across all of our 7 counties of southern Wisconsin, trends in chloride in our surface waters, both rivers and lakes, and then looking at total loading of chloride, as well as trying to recommend some practices to help manage that chloride. So right now, as I mentioned, it's an ongoing study. We're in our 2nd year of data collection. So it started in October of 2018. We wrapped up a little bit of it in October 2020. We had 2 full years. Then we decided to extend one last winter. So we're kind of wrapping it up now as the weather gets a little bit warmer outside. And then we're at the start right now of our 4-year analysis effort, which will end in 2024. So what we're doing is we're really trying to monitor chloride trends, again, in lakes and rivers, as well as a component for groundwater across the entire region, with the goal of estimating chloride loads from all different sources. So taking into account both the concentrations of chloride as well as the discharge, for example, in rivers, to look at that mass loading. We then want to review the state-of-the-art technology and evaluate best management practices, de-icing and water softening and other practices, and then ultimately develop alternate management scenarios that meet public safety standards, but also minimize our damage to the environment from road salts, because we need to use road salt to help clear our roads, but we want to minimize the damage that road salt could be causing or other sources could be causing. So I think we currently have 40 sites across our 7 county region, but today I'll be focusing on the 12 sites that we have within the Fox River Watershed, which is outlined in yellow here, or shown in yellow here on the map on the right. So again, we had these 12 sites operational between October 2018 and October 2020, and we still have these sites running today. These range for the most northern sites, the Pewaukee River, and then Fox River Waukesha. We have 2 other sites on the main stem, which are at Fox River Rochester and Fox River New Munster. And we also have sites on some of the major tributaries, including as I mentioned, the Pewaukee River, the McGonigle River, Honey Creek, Sugar Creek, and the White River. And so each one of these sites, we have some continuous connectivity monitors that are every 5 minutes collecting information on specific connectivity, water temperature, and water level. And you can see an example of that in the bottom left. You see the sensor attached to that cinder block in the river there, and that's sending data up to our telemetry unit, which shoots it over the cellular network to our online database. And so we can look at these connectivity, water temperature, and water level in near real time, which has been a real boon for us, being able to respond to event sampling and grabbing samples and that kind of thing. In addition to this continuous monitoring, we're also doing monthly sampling at these monitoring sites. So each month we travel out to each site and we're doing grab samples of groundwater samples to look at some of the major anions and cations. These anions include chloride and sulfate, and the cations being potassium, sodium, magnesium. We're also looking at the total water hardness. While we're out there doing the grab sample, we also bring along a sonde to check the water connectivity with a sonde and compare it against our continuous monitoring, just to make sure that our monitoring looks, just to validate what we're seeing. The ultimate goal of this monitoring is to essentially use the connectivity monitoring as a proxy for chloride concentrations. It'd be really expensive to do this kind of continuous monitoring every 5 minutes at all 40 sites, just doing chloride grab samples, not to mention we have to be there physically the entire time. So by using these continuous monitors and building this regression relationship, we're able to use conductivity as a proxy for chloride concentrations. One of the tricky things is that conductivity is not a direct measure of chloride. Conductivity is looking at the total number of ions in water. And so that's why we're looking at these other ions like potassium, sodium, magnesium to kind of tease apart, the relative influence of chloride with these other major ions through some regression modeling. Give you an example of what this looks like. This is our site at the Fox River at Waukesha, which is site number 1. The green line here, so on the x-axis, we have the date. So this is starting in October 2018, all the way through November 2018. On the left y-axis is specific conductivity. The right y-axis is the chloride concentrations. So the green line is that continuous conductivity measurement, again, every 5 minutes since October 1st, 2018 at midnight. And the black triangles are the corresponding chloride concentrations that from our monthly and event graph sampling. And that red dashed line is DNR's chronic chloride toxicity limit of 395 milligrams per liter. And so this site, again, it's kind of right in the middle of downtown Waukesha. It's actually a really good example of some of our more urban sites where you see these peaks. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but you see these peaks occurring here in the winter months. This is February of 2019, and then February of 2020. And these peaks are more characteristic of our urban sites. You only see these same kind of behaviors in our more rural sites. And it's during these peaks, you can see most of the time the chloride is staying below that chronic toxicity criterion. But during these peaks, we have been seeing chloride exceeding that chronic toxicity criterion at this site. Just giving more of an overview of kind of the entire watershed. So on the x-axis here, you have the different locations, all the different sites we have in the watershed, all including the tributaries. And on the y-axis, we have the chloride concentration. That red dashed line is that same chronic chloride toxicity criterion. And these box plots show kind of the distribution of chloride from each one of these sites. And I just arranged them here from lowest to highest. And so these highest sites on the right side of the graph are sites 1 and 8 in the map shown here. And these are our Pewaukee River and Fox River Waukesha sites. And again, I want to stress that this is just concentration, not total mass loading. So the Fox River is significantly smaller here, a lot less flow than it is further downstream. But we do see higher concentrations at these sites than we do at the downstream sites, Fox River at Rochester and Fox River at New Munster, which you can see here and here. We also see that some of these tributaries, or as you move downstream, you're seeing essentially dilution from some of these tributaries. A lot of these headwater streams and some of these rivers really don't have the elevated concentrations of chloride that we see in some of these more urban sites upstream. For example, at the Mugwanago Nature Road site, which is to the far left, we actually have some pretty low concentrations, relatively speaking. It's only 3 times higher than those pre-settlement concentrations of 5 milligrams per liter, which isn't, it's still 3 times higher is quite a bit, but compared to the 50 times higher we're seeing in Waukesha, it's substantially lower, relative. Some other interesting patterns we're able to discern from this data with the continuous monitoring is by looking at kind of what we think is a flush of chloride traveling downstream. So these are 2 separate winter events. On the left is February of 2019. The right is January 2020. The blue line is the connectivity for the Fox River Waukesha. The orange is Fox River at Rochester, and green is Fox River at New Munster. And so you can see the river miles there going from most upstream, middle to most downstream. And so what we think is happening is that you see these really flashy connectivity spikes in Waukesha occurring during snowmelt periods, or when you have a lot of runoff, or even snowfall in some cases, that we think might be indicative of road salts and other sources of chloride getting washed into the Fox River. But we don't see the same spikes occurring at the same time downstream. They actually show up, it looks like a couple days later, as these kind of muted rises where the peaks might be getting a little bit lower and a bit more diluted from the less chloride, more chloride dilute waters of the tributaries, as well as from groundwater. So really, it's kind of this pulse of chloride we think is showing up from Waukesha, showing up a couple days later in these downstream sites, and then eventually moving into the Fox River through Illinois as well. That's kind of a glance at some of our river monitoring we're doing. Again, what we want to look at really are not just the trends in chloride, but trying to explain what's causing some of these trends. And to do that, we're really looking at a lot of the watershed characteristics. So for each one of these sites, we've delineated drainage areas. And you can see this map on the right is the land use for the New Munster monitoring site, which is pretty close to the Wisconsin-Illinois border. And we really want to look at a couple different things within these drainage areas, some of which is the geology and the soils of the watershed of the drainage area. As I mentioned, it's not just chloride that can affect this conductivity relationship. It's other ions have a say as well. So you want to be able to account for those other ions when exploring, using this regression model and building this regression model. In addition, we want to look at the difference in urban versus rural land uses. As I mentioned before, these land uses are likely to have different sources of chloride, where in urban sites you might have more road salt or wastewater treatment plants. And in rural sites, you might see more potassium chloride fertilizer being applied, for example. And so we really want to be able to tease apart these different sources of chloride and how they're contributing to overall concentrations and mass loads within our waterways. And another thing we want to look into are also the presence of wastewater treatment facilities upstream. We know we get quite a bit of high chloride effluent from these facilities, so we want to account for those facilities in our evaluation as well. As I mentioned, it's not just rivers that we're doing, we're also looking at some lakes as well. So we have, across the entire chloride study, we have 6 studied lakes, 3 of which are in the Fox River watershed. That's Volt's Geneva Lake in southern Walworth County, Little Muskego Lake in southeastern Waukesha County, and Volt's Lake in southern Kenosha County. And these lakes we're sampling quarterly for conductivity, chloride, and other ions like magnesium and calcium. These lakes vary in their type, so we're looking at seepage, spring, and drainage lakes. And then we're also delineating the drainage areas for these lakes to look at some of the similar features as with our river sites. So land use, geology, soils, that kind of thing, as well as shoreline development. To give a glimpse of some of the stuff we're doing here, we've been collecting seasonal chloride profiles from these lakes. And so this is some data from last year as well as early this winter, I think February of this year, looking at profiles from Little Muskego, Volt's, and Geneva Lake. So Volt's are the gray triangles, Geneva is the orange squares, and then Little Muskego is the blue diamonds, each one of these. And these are showing profiles from spring, summer, fall, and winter. It's the depth is on the y-axis, and then you have the chloride concentration on the x-axis. And so looking across these 3 different lakes, a couple of things jump out right away. First, we can see that Little Muskego in the blue has much higher concentrations of chloride than does Geneva or Volt's. And I think from looking at others monitoring, it seems like Little Muskego might have some of the higher concentrations for any lake in our region. We also see that Little Muskego is exhibiting some seasonal stratification in chloride as well, where you have higher concentrations of chloride at lower depths and lower concentrations at shallower depths, but only during certain times of the year. You can kind of see that pattern in the spring, summer, and fall profiles, but the winter profile is more of a straight line, which is with depth, which is essentially how Geneva and Volt's look as well. If you actually convert these, it's important to consider that these lakes are very different sizes. They have very different retention times. Geneva obviously is enormous compared to Volt's and Little Muskego. So when you actually convert these concentrations into a total mass of chloride in the lake, we see that Little Muskego is still receiving the most chloride per acre at about 0.41 tons of salt per acre per year, which is the equivalent of 221 dump truck loads of salt going to Little Muskego every year. Volt's is only receiving about 1 dump truck load, and Geneva is receiving about 186 dump truck loads, which is not that dissimilar from Little Muskego, but again, Geneva is a much larger lake, so a lot more volume. So the concentration isn't quite as high as we see in Little Muskego. Some of our next steps in this study, as I mentioned, we're now currently finishing up the field work with, snow melt underway here. We have some final winter sampling we've been doing at targeted sites across the region. We're developing a framework for some of our data management and analysis. Their salt loads and incorporating more brine into their road treatments, their winter road treatments, as well as some other pretty cool things like there's been some, the town of Lynn now to optimize their water softeners. So just want to quickly thank our funding and partners. And if you have any additional information, you can contact our chief environmental engineer or chief biologist, or see our website, the link below. And with the remaining time, I just want to switch gears a bit if we still have a second. So as I mentioned, we've been doing this kind of chloride study and the thing that we've been really focused on, but there are others looking at water quality issues, not just sewer pack obviously, but many other entities. And so something I want to kind of talk about a little bit was kind of bridging, looking at data sharing and data exchange to kind of bridge the state line and look at data collected from multiple different entities. And so the examples, some of the examples of that are, you can see here, this is a map of the water quality exchange, of the water quality portal, which is a national collaboration between federal, tribal, and state partners that has over 380 million water quality records. And so you can see the locations of all the different partners across the lower 48 in this map. Another great example of this kind of data sharing from multiple different entities and organizations that's a little more local to the Fox River is the Fox River Environmental Database, which was developed by the Fox River Study Group and the Illinois State Water Survey. And that database currently houses about 1.9 million water quality records just for the Fox River watershed, both Wisconsin and Illinois. And that's a mixture of federal, state, and local entities. So kind of, we really want to highlight some of the great work people have been doing in building these databases. Unfortunately, it's still kind of difficult if you're not familiar with, pulling data out of databases to work with this kind of information. So we thought we could help out a bit with that. So one of our kind of side projects has been trying to merge chloride records for the entire Fox River watershed from multiple data sources. So pulling records out of the water quality portal, the Fox River Environmental Database, as well as from the Wisconsin DNR's Surface Water Integrated Monitoring System, known as SWIMS. So I really wanted to show kind of a bit of a data visualization for chloride records in the Fox River itself. So to do that, we pulled chloride data for each one of these databases. We removed duplicate data from each one of these databases because some of this data is stored in all three different sources. And then we filtered it down to only include surface water samples in the Fox River itself. To make that a bit more accessible for folks, we then create a data dashboard for all this chloride information using the crosstalk library from in the R programming language. So basically making a simple little web page with some sliders and some checkboxes that you can use to interactively filter data and then display that filtered data in a linked map, a figure, and a table. So I can transition to that real quick and hopefully you guys be able to follow along with hopefully you guys are still seeing this. So this is kind of a picture of the web page right now. Let's have a bit of a description of where the data came from here, as well as disclaimer about, this is still kind of a work in progress. But what we've kind of built into this is basically to allow people to kind of visualize and explore the data a bit. So you can see down here, there's a interactive map. You can zoom in and you can zoom out. It's a little laggy my screen right now, unfortunately. There's a scatter plot here. And there's a table here kind of showing where the source, the chloride concentrations, the collection date, the source, and where the information came from. And what you can do is actually filter. Let's say we want to look at only winter samples because we know winter samples are generally higher than summer samples due to road salting. You can just pick out the different months you want to look at, and then the graph will update automatically as you pick those out. And you can apply multiple displays. Let's say we want to look at only the highest winter samples. You can drag this slider and you can see the map kind of changing down here below. So only pick out some of the highest concentrations that we've seen, and the table will update automatically as well. So this is kind of just a brief example of some of the stuff we're kind of looking to do to kind of help, I guess I should mention, we also can look at, the information collected by different groups. So we can look at just the Fox River study group and see all the work that they've been doing, and all the data they collected kind of in their working area here. So I don't want to, I just want to kind of highlight this as a potential tool to help look at, we can look across the state line here and look at trends, not being quite so limited to just what we have from swims, just what we have from the Illinois databases, but really look across the entire range. And something that's a bit concerning when you actually look at the data, this is all the data across the entire range here, is that you do see concentrations have been increasing from the 1960s through 2020. And that's not just true for winter months, that's true even if you look at only the summer months. You see essentially the same trend. And so what that's telling me, just kind of as a first glance at some of this, is that we're seeing potentially, some of these either elevated loading or elevated concentrations in some of our tributaries or in our groundwater that's leading to some higher flows in these summer months. It's not just this winter salting going on. So again, if we had to draw a line for, I'm not quite sure what the Illinois state standard is, but again, for that chronic DNR standard, that line is right about here. So it's not quite there yet, but definitely has been creeping up over time. So something we want to definitely keep track of and try to, find solutions to keep it from becoming a real serious issue for the Fox River. So with that, I think that'll end up my talk, and I will be happy to take any questions if I have any time left.
Yeah, we do have some time. First question, do you know the acute chloride toxicity level in what organisms are most susceptible?
The acute toxicity level, I guess it depends on who you ask. I'll go back to that slide real quick. I want to say at the top of my head, the DNR is the 757 is the acute level, and the US EPA is 860 milligrams per liter. I know they use different animal dosing studies to look at that and looking at like LD50s, that kind of thing. So, when does 50% of the animal population essentially perish with a certain chloride level? I don't know off the top of my head which are most susceptible. I would imagine smaller organisms generally being more susceptible to these kind of things. I know there are some invasive species, not just, like aquatic plants, for example, that have been shown to be to benefit from higher chloride levels, where they're more accustomed to it than some of our native freshwater plants. And so, as we're increasing the salinity essentially of our waters, you might see different species be able to take advantage of that essentially and thrive in this kind of different chemical environment. But so I don't know off the top of my head which are the most susceptible of all the different, but I can try to look up some information on the dosing studies and share that with folks.
Okay, next question. Do you have any idea what the ratio is between water softener and road salt use in the watershed?
Not at the moment. That is definitely one of the goals of this overall study. So again, we think that road salts are going to be a major, especially in more urban areas, a major contributor. But we know there are going to be contributions from water softening as well. And so in addition to the road salt and de-icing information we're collecting from municipalities across the watershed and across the 7 counties, we're also collecting information on water softeners to try to get a sense of the different contributions from these different sources to help answer questions like that. So at this point, I couldn't really say at all how much, I couldn't give you a percentage breakdown at this point, but we're hoping to find out.
Okay, next question. Justin, have you looked at this tool created at the University of Illinois? The Great Lakes to Gulf Virtual Observatory is an interactive geospatial application that connects users with tools designed to help visual map, explore, and compare referenced water quality monitoring data aggregated from multiple sources. And there's a link here. Are you familiar with this at all, Justin?
It sounds somewhat familiar. I've looked at and appreciated these different tools from a lot of different sources over, I as an amateur programmer myself, I try to strive to emulate some of the stuff that they're doing. I don't see the link, unfortunately, here, but yeah, it sounds exactly what I think, just trying to make this information a bit more available to folks who don't have the technical expertise to pull data from databases or even really sort through it. I think tools like this are really useful for that kind of thing, and kind of showing, highlighting where in the watershed we should take action for different pollutants. And just helping inform people about their watershed and the connections between, different tributaries in the watershed. So no, so I unfortunately can't look at it right now, but I'm sure it's fantastic. So I support that.
Okay, well, we've hit that 2:15 mark. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Nick, for your presentations. There's certainly a lot of questions for Nick that we'll try to save here and possibly get to his contact information there. So we have a 15-minute break before we come back to the breakout sessions. Thank you. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Nick.
Thanks, Ben.